Yeah, I guess we're going to do something a little different today and just talk about Hearthstone. As I mentioned in a community post on YouTube earlier today, I've spent the last couple days like trying to make a good Hearthstone gameplay video, like always, but I just kept recording decks and ideas that just absolutely could not win games. Various like quest decks, just like some fun value decks, and nothing was working. So I was like, look, I got to give up. I can't spend hours and hours and hours recording and not getting a video. So I just put up a little community post. Like, hey, once there's a patch, I'll try again, see what we can do. But basically, I've played like most of the stuff that's new and works. Everything else is like, 97% old cards and Elise, and those just didn't seem like fun enough videos for you. So anyway, on that post, a lot of you said, hey, why don't you just make a video talking about Hearthstone? And I was like, okay, sure. That's a good way to fill the video schedule. There's obviously been a lot of hubbub in Hearthstone lately, and I had thoughts, of course, but we just went through a bunch of hubbub in Marvel Snap, a bunch of problems, and I did a whole video on that. And it's always like a lot of responsibility to be a mouthpiece for the community or whatever, and I don't really feel like I'm in that position in Hearthstone as much, because it's been my secondary game for a while. People like Zeddy or certainly Kibler put out a really well-spoken popular video this week. They're more in tune to the game. I feel like leave that space for those folks. Raren has said a lot of things on stream, I've heard, but you guys asked and I have thoughts, so I thought sure, I'll share them. Probably many of these will echo what other people have said. Maybe I'll have a few unique or surprising takes throughout this video, but I don't know. I didn't want to do a whole clickbaity thing and like Hearthstone is dead, or you won't believe what I think about Hearthstone. So we're just gonna sit and talk about it. No fancy graphics, no Subway Surfers, just talking about what's going on with Hearthstone. And I guess I'll start with a few like really obvious things to get out of the way, and then dive more into the kind of like design discussion, because I think there's been a lot of talk about design of new sets and power creep and all these sorts of things. We'll get into that, but first I just want to clear a few like really obvious complaints that everybody has, but just to make sure we all know where we stand. So I guess number one, the King Krush pet, right? He came out, he's there in the menu of the game. Literally my toddler this morning was looking at my Hearthstone screen as I was trying to record a video saying dino, 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 because he's just always there on screen trying to remind you to buy this dino that if you actually buy, for a vast majority of people will cost, I guess, $158, because you have to spend incrementally more and more to get more pulls on this slot machine. And then the last pull almost inevitably will be King Krush, at which point you will have spent $158. I've literally only seen one King Krush in Hearthstone so far, like actually in the game. I don't play as much as many people, but I've probably played 10 plus hours, 15 hours since he came out, maybe, I don't know. And I've seen one pet. So he hasn't been particularly popular that we can see on average, but I don't know if Hearthstone cares, because a lot of people will spend like $10, $15, $20 or whatever incrementally to start seeing if they can hit the King Krush, and then give up once they've hit their threshold. Like, oh, I can't spend more than $50 trying to win this thing, because they don't realize that it's basically impossible to get in without committing to the full $158, because they make it really hard to find the odds. It's all obscured. It's not like right there on screen, and it feels like it seems like it should be kind of an even chance to hit it. So there's a lot of basically dark patterns is what they're called in the world of kind of manipulating consumers with, frankly, sort of evil ways to like trick them or make things less obvious. Like, yes, technically it's all above board. Like technically the odds are included, and technically if you read everything, yes, of course, like the information's there. And a lot of you will come in the comments defending Blizzard saying, well, no, technically it's all on the up and up, but it's still scummy, in my opinion. Like it's still really shady. It's still really manipulative, and it absolutely will take advantage of a lot of people who aren't paying attention. And the technically to me is not a good excuse. It's still super scummy. And ultimately $158 for a pet is like absurd. Like it's so crazy that I can't even believe it. Like Marvel Snap, by the way, has its own obscene monetization problems, which we've been talking about for 3 years now, and they've somehow ratcheted up even more recently. I will say, like, the one distinction there is, King Krush is a cosmetic, Marvel Snap has monetization problems for actual game pieces. I would rather have problems with cosmetics than game pieces because, you know, making $100 cards is obscene. Cards are a little different than Hearthstone and then Marvel Snap. Like, you know, there are fewer cards in Marvel Snap, but, you know, it would probably still be equivalent to like $100 for like a pack or something in Hearthstone, or maybe $100 for the 5 packs or something, right? Like, still obscene monetization problems for game pieces. That's its own issue. The $158 pet, like, normally if they just like sold the pet for $158, I would say, oh my God, you're insane. That's outrageous. But I'd be like, it's a cosmetic, whatever. I don't really care that much. But the fact that they sell it for $158, but also do so in a really manipulative, really scummy way, that makes me mad about it again, right? It's just like the worst possible way to do it, the scummiest, most evil way to do it, which, and it's not even like transparent. Well, it is transparent. It's not even like, you know, it's just transparently super evil. It's not transparent that, you know, the odds and stuff aren't transparent, but the evil is just like the most blatantly, obviously like greedy, scummy thing Blizzard's ever done from a monetization standpoint. So I almost could have looked the other way if it was just a $158 pet. It still would have been insane and stupid and no one would buy it, but they just made it even worse by the way they've done it and the manipulativeness of it. So anyway, yeah, King Krush sucks. All these games are getting so greedy and so annoying with monetization. It's really making it hard to be a creator in this space because it's like, man, what do you do? You know what I wouldn't give if somebody just released a strategy video game that wasn't crazy greedy. I just want to like pay $15 and be done and have a game I can play forever. But anyway, moving on. Twist mode is another obvious thing I wanted to talk about because what is going on with twist mode? It's just disappeared. I don't actually know when the last time twist mode was active is, but I see Zeddy tweeting about this all the time, and it's like, it hasn't been updated in like 7 months. It's obviously something they've given up on. Obviously, they're unwilling to commit development hours to this. Obviously, it's not being supported anymore, but they won't officially say like, hey, twist mode is dead. You have to fess up and say, hey guys, we're killing twist mode at some point. You can't just leave it in the client as this inactive dead. I mean, you can, but it's stupid and it's annoying is what I'm getting at. It's just crazy to me that they're completely radio silent on twist mode. It's more crazy to me that they keep making game modes and then sunsetting them. We've had duels, mercenaries, twist, classic. All of these things are just failures. No one should ever invest in a new game mode again in Hearthstone. Frankly, Arena, kind of shaky as well with the rework to Arena. Not a new game mode, but like a reworked one, and a lot of people had Arena problems. I think they drove a lot of people away from Arena. Maybe it's getting a little fixed. I don't keep up as well with Arena, but I tried it out, wasn't really digging it. I thought I was gonna like make some videos on it, but I don't know. It wasn't my vibe despite all the changes. But man, it's really hard to support game modes when they just keep releasing them and failing them. And I'll tell you, the problem is they have two problems, right? They either design it for monetization and it sucks, which is the mercenaries problem and the first pass of the Arena problem, right? It was designed monetization first, gameplay second. That's a problem. The secondary problem is they designed the gameplay first, but then they can't monetize it well. This is the duels and twist problem, right? Like, these were probably okay from a gameplay standpoint. You know, you might argue still some problems, but probably okay. But they can't monetize it, so then they stop supporting it because they can't make any money. They can't hit that magic middle ground. Frankly, Battlegrounds was also that problem. Battlegrounds designed incredibly well, designed from the ground up for fun first. Couldn't figure out how to monetize it. I still don't think they monetize it well. I think basically Battlegrounds is just too popular for them to kill because it keeps players in the ecosystem, right? But I bet they really wish they could monetize it better. They've tried new things and made it worse. You know, the little like reroll tokens or whatever, all that stuff. The passes, like, they keep trying to monetize it, but I just don't think it's ever monetizing that well. So that's the problem with these game modes. But you can't support new game modes. Like, they've just killed any trust from the player base when it comes to game modes. So Twist is an embarrassment, is my takeaway there. I just cannot believe what's going on with Twist. So moving on to the next really easy, obvious thing to talk about is Ridiculous Hat. Some of you will know who Ridiculous Hat is. He's been like one of the community managers for Hearthstone. I don't actually know anybody's official titles. I thought he was like an influencer manager, but he does like lots of stuff basically always tweeting, always on Reddit, always like hyper engaged with the Hearthstone player base, which he went, I should say, a mile above and beyond what he needed to do with us as creators. He was an absolute all-star, put like the Marvel Snap community team just to absolute shame. I've had my own problems and talked about them with Marvel Snap and their handling with both creators and players from a community standpoint. It's been dire over there. But frankly, Ridiculous Hat was incredible. And Hearthstone's had some solid community managers in the past. Alkali was a really good community manager before Hat. But Hat just took it to an entirely new level because he's like, he lives and breathes Hearthstone, and he always has. Like, you know, he was a creator first, and just, he was doing a lot of that stuff for free anyway. And he was just like the perfect man for the job. You guys cannot believe how many messages he wrote, how available he was. Just the best possible employee you could ever imagine, and worth his salary and weight 10 times over, I'm sure, for the returns he offered to the game, keeping players engaged, keeping players happy, just building excitement, promoting, like, you know, kind of both a creator and an influencer and an employee all in one. You can't say enough good things about this guy. Like, honestly, if you don't know, he's just the best thing that could have happened to Hearthstone, right? And the game is absolutely worse now because Blizzard did not renew his contract. I took a long time to get to the payoff there, but in case you hadn't heard, they didn't renew his contract. He was not like a full-time employee. He was a contract employee for I maybe like a year and a half, 2 years, whatever. I don't know what it was, which is just like the biggest oversight or mistake they could have possibly made. Because like I said, he had to be worth it 10 times over. Maybe not from an immediately obvious, actionable, like viewable standpoint, right? Like they may have said, oh, you know, like we can't tie any direct revenue to you. You're not worth it. We're canceling your position. But just shows a complete and utter lack of understanding of the long tail effects of somebody like him, who just makes the game 1,000 times better and more popular over time because he's so engaging for the players, so supportive for the players, so supportive for creators who are then engaging the players, right? Like there's just all these knock-on effects from somebody like that existing in your organization, that losing that, it's just a mistake of unimaginable proportions. I can't even overstate how silly and how bad it is. So, you know, initially people thought he was like fired or whatever, which sounded like even more aggressively stupid. But I will argue that not renewing his contract and not being ready to bring him on full time and give him a raise and increase the significance of his position and reach and power and autonomy are all incredible mistakes and incredibly short-sighted, and showcase the corporate bloat that exists in so many of these organizations, and certainly in Blizzard, it seems, where, you know, I don't know if it's managers, executives, whatever, just don't see and understand the value that people can create, because that's just an incredible oversight. Just absolutely an enormous mistake. So bring back Hat, bring him back in a full-time capacity, let the man work, because nobody loves Hearthstone more, and nobody has done more for the game since he's been a Blizzard employee, that's for sure. So, okay, that's the simple stuff. The obvious, like, God, what is going on? Why have they screwed this up so much sort of stuff. So now let's move on to the more complicated stuff. And this has a lot more nuance and a lot more, I think, room for discussion and a lot of different opinions, and nobody's wrong on this sort of stuff. Like, it's just the design side of Hearthstone and what's going on with Hearthstone's design, what's going on with the, like, power level of the design, and what's going on with sort of the focus or the goals of the design. Because I think with Lost City of Unguro, we certainly saw some shortcomings. And I don't know if I'm going to have the right answers for you here. I think there's a couple camps. We sort of saw like a Kibler camp where he's saying there's too much power creep. And I'm not going to recap this well, so go watch Kibler's video on Hearthstone. But basically he's saying there's too much power creep. We've actually had another camp rise up, I think, with the Vicious Syndicate crew, saying there's actually not enough power creep. I might actually land somewhere in the middle, honestly. Sounds like a cop-out, but we'll talk about both sides and why I think both have great points. But almost regardless of where you stand and what your argument is, I think you have to acknowledge that this most recent expansion has certainly been a flop. It has landed in a really unsatisfying way. Very few new things to do that are exciting. And more so, they don't even feel close. We've seen all this data coming in on the quests and stuff. Many of the quests have like 30% win rates. So it's not like, oh, these are tier 3 decks that just missed the mark a little bit. It is an utter and complete failure when it comes to competitiveness with these quests. And that's, I think that's a problem, right? Like, if you want them to be not that strong, which maybe that's an argument, because before we've had quests like the Stormwind meta where the quests like felt like they went the other direction. They were too strong and too crazy and too linear, and that was a big issue. Maybe they wanted to avoid that. That's fair, right? But you don't bring them in at 30% if that's the case, right? You want the quest to land at 46% or something where they're playable. You can have fun with them. People can still maybe climb if they really master it and refine it. It's not just completely unplayable garbage, right? That is the difference. The delta there between what, it should be and what it is just too high. It's too much. It's just too big of a failure. So, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how Blizzard tests stuff. There's always a big delay on like design into implementation. And there's like, but there's something in this process. There's some gap here. There's something going wrong, right? Maybe they don't give enough people to test. Maybe the like design direction from the top down is pointed in a way that doesn't make sense, or there's just not enough design direction or goals to hit. It's really hard to say because we can't really see behind the scenes, but I think it's very fair to say that something is not working. Particularly this set, maybe other sets as well. Something has gone awry, has gone amiss. And I think you have to say something has to change. You can't have expansions like this coming out all the time. It's going to absolutely accelerate the demise of the game if you do. So I guess like to dive into this like power level conversation a little bit, I really will say like I don't feel like I'm the most competent person to discuss this because I'm just not as plugged into the meta. Like I mean I've been playing Hearthstone every month. I'm making videos, but it's not like diehard. I'm not in there every day streaming for 4 or 5 hours or whatever. So take me with a little bit of a grain of salt here. There are bigger and better minds discussing this sort of stuff. But if you want to hear my thoughts anyway, like clearly this expansion landed low from a power level standpoint, right? And you can't say that this expansion power creeped. Like there's just no logical explanation there. Like there's just nothing here is so good that it's, I mean, maybe Quest Paladin, but that's only at super low ranks. It's not even that good at higher ranks. But that doesn't mean there's no power creep, because what that might mean is there was power creep in the past, and like we put out some really strong sets, and now maybe Hearthstone's trying to correct and pull power down, right? To bring the game into a healthier long-term power level state. But the problem might be, if there's a few sets that were really power creeped up, the new sets can't compete. And I mean, it makes no sense to me to say, hey, the game is too powerful right now. Let's print a bunch of bad stuff to make the game less powerful. That doesn't make sense because that's not going to change anything, at least not immediately, because it's like a race, right? It's like, oh man, all the cars now are going 250 miles an hour, man. That's too dangerous. We want cars to be slower. Let's just make all the new cars go 200 miles an hour. Well, there's still going to be the old cars going 250, right? Like you can't slow down a race because the winner is still going to be the guy going the fastest. You can't slow it down by bringing down the average and just printing a bunch of slower ones. You have to bring down the top, right, to solve that problem. Now, you might say, hey, rotation could do that, right? Because we just had, like, let's say Great Dark Beyond was a really strong set, particularly the StarCraft mini set. We've seen Starships. We've seen StarCraft stuff as well be really strong and meta-defining for a long time there. So, once that rotates, maybe you could do that, right? But you have a whole year in the meantime. Like, you can't print 3 bad sets for a year and then hope it resets later. And like, yeah, that would work, but in that year, everybody's gone because the game is just boring and dead, and you're playing the same overpowered Starship and StarCraft stuff for a year. So you have to really aggressively nerf if you want to reset that power level and you want to lower things on average. I don't think that's going to be enough for quests. I think you also have to bring quests up, frankly, right? There's just such a big delta there. You got to come both ways to make quests feel viable if that's your goal. So anyway, like, this is clearly not a power crept set. I think certainly the game feels to me, though, overall much more powerful than it did in the past. Scarier stuff is happening. More aggressive boards are happening. We have, like, turn forward boards with 8/8s and 4/4, just like big piles of crazy stuff we never had in the past. Some people maintain the game is not more powerful on average, but I don't know. I just can't believe that. Like, it just feels to me like the things we're doing now just absolutely demolish the things you were doing in the first few years of Hearthstone, right? But here's my interesting take. I don't think that's a problem, actually. I think power creep is good for games. I think you want to have some power creep. There's just nuance to it, right? Number one is like the degree of power creep, right? You want it to be slow and steady over time. You don't want rapid inclines of power creep, right? Because that just pushes things so fast. You want really steady, slow power creep, not spikes, right? Because what I think happens with Hearthstone is like it spikes up and then they try to pull it down, but it just keeps spiking and it ramps up too much over time, right? So you don't want spikes, but power creep's good because you want people to play new stuff. Like, it's fun to play the new stuff. You want the new things to be better than the old things, because just being interesting, unfortunately, is not enough. People have to also be able to win with the new things. So power creep in general, I think, is actually pretty good and important for games to maintain live service games like this. They need power creep. The issue with power creep in video games comes in, of course, because it's often tied to monetization, and then there becomes a monetization pressure to keep up with the new stuff. And it also creates sort of a greed problem potentially where, you print new stuff that's way more powerful. And, then you kind of force the player bases to move into that new stuff, constantly having to buy new things, right? So there's always this kind of awkward pressure between power creep and monetization that exists in free-to-play games in particular, because, you got to spend to keep up. I don't actually think that's been too big of a problem in Hearthstone. I think Hearthstone's monetization for game pieces has been in a pretty good spot, and I think you can get really good decks pretty affordably. So I don't think that's been a super unhealthy relationship. Where I think the power creep conversation goes for me is something a little bit more subtle than power creep, which is what I call synergy creep. I think Hearthstone's problem is actually not that the game is more powerful on average. I think it's that decks are continually designed in a more and more synergistic way over time. Again, there are ups and downs on this, but so often when we look at new sets in Hearthstone, you get 5 or 6 cards that are all printed with a very clearly predefined deck in mind. And sometimes those are just really parasitic effects. Parasitic effects in card games are what we mean to be effects that like only work within themselves. Let's talk about, say, like starships, right? Some starship cards only work specifically with starships. They have a starship synergy, right? And they don't work if you don't have starship stuff. That's very, very parasitic. If we look at this set, I'm sure we have some examples here as well. Oh, actually, Shaman has some parasitic effects with the Sizzling Cinders, right? You've got these like Sizzling Cinder synergies. You need to run Sizzling Cinders to make all these cards work. So they're pre-packaging the deck for you. Sometimes that's really obvious and really transparent. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle, but like still, like the whole Shaman set is basically Fire Elemental Synergy deck. And they basically made 10 cards that all go in the same deck. That's the quest kind of moves away from that, but they all have like dual types and stuff, so they all still connect together. They basically made 10 cards that's one deck. And when you look at old sets from 8-9 years ago, whatever, I don't know, let's look at I like Whispers of the Old Gods, right? When you look at like Whispers of the Old Gods cards, none of them go together. There's like a couple evolved cards, but they're not parasitic. They work fine. I should probably just like pull this up for you guys to look at, honestly, so you can like see a difference, right? When you look at an old set, right? Like, what's the deck here? There's no deck, right? There's absolutely just no deck here. You have 2 things that evolve, but it's not a deck. It's just 2 cards, and they both work independently. Like, they're both fine with other things. Honestly, they don't even really go together that well, right? You have a couple totem things. Like, here's a totem card and a totem card, not a deck. This is an independently good card, independently not good card, but playable card, right? Couple overload things, but that's just a core piece of the class. No deck here. Now look at Lost City of Unguro. It's just a pre-printed deck. And like, no, not all the cards are good. You don't run Magma or whatever, probably, but it's just a deck they made for you. And that's a problem, I think, because what it does is it creates this scenario where if that deck is really good and they got the power level at the right spot and they made it strong enough or whatever, there's no like experimentation around it. It's just like plug and play, and it's not fun necessarily to like build that or solve that. Like, yeah, there's obviously other cards you put in the deck or whatever, but you know, that's probably another little 5 or 10 card package or something that's really obviously solved for you. Whereas in the old days, you know, you were like building decks, you were creating things and finding lines, and it wasn't perfectly optimized and it wasn't solved ahead of time. And yes, it might still only take a few days to solve that problem, but it still feels like when it's not optimized so synergistically that suboptimal decks still have room to compete. So, you know, that pile of 30 cards might be the best pile of 30 cards. But if I make a different pile of 30 cards that aren't a predefined deck, it's still competitive against that pile of 30 cards. It can still find wins. It can still do things. But when game plans and win conditions are so perfectly predefined at the stage that they're printed, when that works, which it does sometimes, it's so optimized that unoptimized decks that aren't inherently synergistic just can't compete, which gives you a lot less room for experimentation, which is worse for like people like me who want to do creative, fun things, less than perfect things. You just can't beat the perfect decks because they're just so tight and so efficient and so lethal that you just can't compete. And then it's also kind of worse for budget players as well, because, you know, if you don't have the perfect set of stuff, if you're missing the epic cards from that list that's perfectly synergistic, well, crap, I can't replace it. You know, it's just not I'm taking a huge hit and I can't maybe play my own cards that I happen to have. So it's like a little bit of a monetization pressure as well. So what happens is when those decks hit, they just are the predefined best things that happen, and it's hard to compete against them. When they miss in totality, and all of the cards are useless. So like, you know, if let's say like Murloc Paladin, right? When it hits, it's too good to beat. Again, you know, budget player, beginner player, lower tier players, high tier players, not that good. But like for the first couple of days of the expansion and in lower ranks, you can't beat it because it's just so efficient, so optimized, so synergistic. But if it had missed, if it was really bad, like let's say you needed like 8 Murlocs or something and they missed on the other side of it, and it was a really bad quest, every card would be useless. You would never ever play Murlocs. And it's just this like all-in design philosophy when you pre-print decks like this, where it basically makes entire swaths of the collection useless, or it makes them so meta-definingly strong that it's really frustrating to play anything else. And I think it narrows the meta in a lot of ways. So I don't know, man, like that's an issue for me. Now, from a design standpoint, like I think it's easier probably to design those sorts of sets, right? Because you don't accidentally break things. You know that there are packages people can get excited about. Like they look at a card review and they say, oh, hey, I like Fire Elemental Shaman. Oh, I love Murloc Paladins. And it's this really easy thing to latch onto. So from like a marketing standpoint, from a design easiness standpoint, it clearly has advantages, right? But I think from a like meta health standpoint, I don't know that it does. I don't know about that, right? So I don't know, man. I wish we just got more independently useful cards and kind of piece stuff together as opposed to like really predefined decks and metas. I think they're like solving too much ahead of time, and that just opens them up to problems down the road and ultimately makes the game less fun. Now, I will say a counterpoint to that to some extent is that like a lot of the best decks right now are these just like piles of menagerie stuff. You know, it's basically just like run a bunch of random cards and menagerie jug, and that's like half the meta, which does point away from that synergy conversation a little bit. I think that's more just about like a mana efficiency thing though, in many cases, right? Like it's just like when these other decks are missing, when quests are missing, when all of that synergy stuff doesn't hit, the easiest, best thing to do is just a race to the bottom from an aggro standpoint, right? Because like if other decks aren't strong enough to stabilize or whatever, you just race people down and you create an arms race to the bottom, whether from an aggro standpoint or from a combo standpoint, which is most of the decks we have right now. It's just hyper fast or hyper combo-y. The power level and like the power band is off for like successful mid-range decks, right? It's either combos through like big swings like low, or just lethal combos like Bandage Priest, or more aggressive packages. The only kind of really control thing we have right now, at least it's looking good, is maybe like, you know, Death Knight Starship stuff. It's like decent, I think, and even that's kind of playing for like big swings, almost like a low, where it's a combo that's not a lethal combo, but you know, often it's about get that starship, get that the Reckoner dude or whatever he's called, Reclaimer, Reckoner, the dude that summons Death Rattle's 10-drop guy, whatever, you know, just build an insurmountable board that wins over 2 turns. Or Exodar is literally lethal sometimes in that deck, so it still actually plays like a combo deck. So I don't know, man. Like, that's where I'm at. Like, I think the game got too synergistic and is designed too synergistically, and that just in some way unfolds a lot of these other problems, right? Sometimes it looks like power creep. Sometimes it looks like not enough power. You know, I think it can land in both spots, ironically, depending on the set and the power levels, right? So that's what I would probably try to design cards and sets that just don't feel solved, and like just make some interesting stuff, a little hook there, a little hook here, and see what can come together. But it might just take a full reset for that to work. You know, you have to land in a spot where there's space for that, because if you still have the cars going 250 miles an hour, the new cards going 200 just aren't going to compete. So I don't know if you need a big reset at rotation. They've like tried that stuff before, but I don't think they ever push it far enough. So I don't know. That's my take on the standard design issues. I don't know how insightful those are. Maybe they're a little different than something you've heard already, though. So maybe that's an interesting angle, at least to kick off some discussion, whether or not it's insightful or not. So yeah, Hearthstone's in a weird spot, guys. I don't know. I don't think the game's like dying or anything. I don't think it's, well, at least not like inherently. Like, bad decisions could push it that way, you know. More King Krush type decisions, more failures like Twist if Arena doesn't turn around, you know. A lot of bad decisions being made as far as we can see. So that's always a problem and a concern. But you know, it's had a lot of these moments. It's been around forever, so I think it'll be fine. I'd like to see some changes and some different focus, because right now it's just been really hard for me this week to make any videos, make any content. Like, it's just, which, you know, who cares, right? They don't really care about that, but it's probably emblematic of a bigger problem, which is if I'm not having fun or finding fun things to do, it's a good chance that's a thing for other people as well. They probably also are having a hard time finding fun stuff to do. So, but yeah, that's where I'm at. So, curious to hear your thoughts, man. I don't really do videos like this on Hearthstone anymore, but curious what you guys think, how you're feeling about the game, where you're at, so on. Lots to talk about. So thanks for watching as always, and I guess until next time. Also, they just put out a little thing about some patches, I guess. Here you go. I guess before we go, this just came out, so they are making a lot of changes. My God, that's a lot of buffs and nerfs. So maybe we'll come back soon for some videos, see if we can do some fun stuff. Maybe we'll play the combo Demon Hunter or something. I don't know. Maybe it'll be a fun deck pop up, but we'll try more after this meta reset, after these buffs, see what happens. But until then, thanks for watching, and until next time, game on.